there's a senior anaesthetist who would have been amongst the most privileged people in Palestinian society in Gaza, Nizu Abu Dhaka. He has been displaced multiple times, as have almost all our colleagues. And I was in touch with him 2 weeks ago, and he said he could find nothing to eat. And he has 6 children and a wife to feed. And I went back to nothing. And he said, for 3 days this week, my children have had salt to lick at night, and they fill their bellies with water to stave off the pangs of hunger.
A UN-backed report has confirmed that there is famine in Gaza City and its surrounding area. Tom Fletcher, the UN humanitarian chief, gave this statement upon reading the report.
Read it in sorrow and in anger, not as words and numbers, but as names and lives. Be in no doubt that this is irrefutable testimony. It is a famine, the Gaza famine. It is a famine that we could have prevented. It is a famine that hits the most vulnerable first, each with a name, each with a story, that strips people of dignity before it strips them of life.
Israel's foreign ministry rejects the report and says there is no famine in Gaza. The finding comes as the IDF expand their operation in Gaza City. Let's turn now to Arya Kovler, who's a political commentator based in Jerusalem. Good afternoon, Arya.
Afternoon.
Just give us the very latest on that operation in Gaza City before we come to this finding from the UN-backed body.
Well, it seems like all the preparations are heavily underway for this pretty dramatic operation to conquer Gaza City and then to basically remove all of the inhabitants from Gaza City, which could be as many as 800,000 people, with own estimates. Israel is beginning to send in tents to house some of these people. Must be a lot of tents. Draft orders have gone out to Israeli reservists, and it seems like this operation is due to start at the beginning of September as things stand.
I mean, if you look at the situation in Gaza and what's happened so far, and, you know, we're hearing about this declaration of a famine by this UN-backed organisation, is there public support in Israel for what the IDF is about to do?
So, no, Israel, the majority of Israelis, polls suggest that nobody likes Hamas. Nobody's happy with keeping them in power. But there is a sense that kind of going around in circles here, you know, going into this invasion, this new conquest of Gaza City. Netanyahu told the Israeli people this is Hamas's last bastion, last fortress. Well, he used the same words about Rafah a year and a half ago. And so, you know, the idea that this is going to somehow very quickly bring about the end of the war, the release of the hostages, most Israelis don't believe that anymore. And there is a sense of frustration that other alternatives, other options that maybe don't involve more fighting are not being tried. But if I'm honest, that's not coming out of like broad compassion for Gazans and Palestinians. Israelis don't really see these pictures that you see in the rest of the world. And when we see them, the government tells the public that they're not true, that it's all fake. So Israelis aren't seeing it and they aren't believing it.
But Netanyahu has given a kind of vague indication that he might want to negotiate. There is a sort of peace deal on the table. It's been brokered by Egypt and Qatar. What is the headline sounds positive, but what's the reality?
We don't know. So, you know, Israel and the Americans pushed forward this deal about a month ago now, a bit more, that would say, we'll have a short-term ceasefire, 60 days or so. Hamas will release about half of the hostages that they're holding. And then we'll talk a bit more about maybe a longer-term situation with Hamas leaving power and into the war. Hamas said no. Well, they didn't quite say no, but they had a lot of objections, a lot of reservations. And that deal kind of fell apart. Israel said, okay, no more partial deals. We're not ready to do any kind of a deal now unless it results in the release of all the hostages. Now, what the deal that's being put forward now is pretty much the Israeli deal being put back to Israel. But the Israeli position has moved since then. They said, we're kind of done with that right now. Netanyahu himself, it's unclear what he thinks on this, but the parties to his right are saying if he does any kind of a hostage deal right now, they will bring down his government. And he's already pretty close to a minority government right now because other parties have left him. So he has very little space to maneuver politically.
Very interesting to hear. Arya Kovler, thank you very much for joining us, political commentator based in Jerusalem. Well, let's turn now to Graeme Groom, who's an orthopaedic surgeon who's visited Gaza 40 times, and also here in the studio, Kirsty Brimelow, former chair of the Bar Human Rights Committee. They're both involved in a project to document potential war crimes by Israel. Graeme, let me go to you first, because we've had this report from a UN-backed organisation saying that there is evidence now of man-made famine in Gaza City. Tell us, from what you've witnessed on your visits, what is going on the ground there?
Thank you. I have absolutely no doubt there is starvation in Gaza. I know of no national, international NGO or charity that believes otherwise. The only organisation that refutes it are Mr. Netanyahu's government and the IDF spokesman. From our point of view, the people who are being starved are our patients, our colleagues, and because I've been going for some time, our friends. And I feel their suffering with an absolutely visceral intensity. When we were there, we were most recently there between the 11th of May and the 4th of June. And we had eyewitness verification of the starvation. So our patients that we were treating were undeveloped, they were small, their wounds didn't heal, the infection rate was enormous. I visited the malnutrition clinic at the Nasser hospital and was shown the little scraps of humanity clinging to life on the 27th of May. I've been in touch with the outstanding paediatrician who ran that ward, and she tells me that since then 2 of them have died and 4 of them have been evacuated for treatment elsewhere.
I mean, as a surgeon who you come into your profession to save people's lives, what you witnessed there and what you've heard since must be absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, it is. That's why I say I feel it with a visceral intensity, because it's not only our patients whose terrible wounds, well, we know that 100 are killed by the bombing every day and vastly more are wounded. And when they appear on our operating table, 10 every day with emergencies after that, it is absolutely, it is appalling. A third of children, a third of women, and a third of men of all ages. But it's not only our patients who are starving, our colleagues are starving. There's a senior anaesthetist who would have been amongst the most privileged people in Palestinian society in Gaza, Nizu Abu Daka. He has been displaced multiple times, as have almost all our colleagues. And I was in touch with him 2 weeks ago, and he said he could find nothing to eat. And he has 6 children and a wife to feed. And I went back to nothing. And he said, for 3 days this week, my children have had salt to lick at night, and they fill their bellies with water to stave off the pangs of hunger.
That's really, really hard to hear, Graeme, and thank you for giving us that account. I'll come back to you in just a moment, but let me bring in Kirsty Brimelow, who's former chair of the Bar Human Rights Committee. And Kirsty, you're engaged in taking statements from medics like Graeme Groom,
yes,
and trying to document potential war crimes. Just tell us exactly what you're engaged in.
So, as you say, with surgeons, including Dr. Groom, I'm heading up a team of lawyers, and we're taking statements from the medics who've been back and forth to Gaza. And it's very simple. They're very good at putting their own dossier together in any event, which I've seen, including video footage. But what we're doing as lawyers is we're putting it in an evidential form, storing the videos securely so that they can be used in a judicial system. However, because of the crisis that's happening now of the starvation, it's very important for us to put forward what actually is in those statements. And Dr. Groom has referred to some of it. I've seen those messages from his colleagues. I've seen some of the photographs of family members of his colleagues who are absolutely skeletal. And I've seen the footage of the destruction of children, limbs blown off, unable to recover because also they're starving, and so they're not healing. And so I've seen all that footage, and I'm one step away from it as a lawyer, but it's very hard to watch.
And just hearing Graeme Groom's account there, very upsetting. But you have the Israeli government denying this report today from the UN-backed organisation. Do you? What can lawyers do to sort of, give yourself, I guess, ammunition to fight those claims from the government?
Well, it's an astonishing position. Any denial by Israel is just not a credible position, because there is ample evidence and ample overwhelming evidence of malnutrition, of severe acute malnutrition, of starvation, and all put together we have the declaration of famine in the report, which is not only a single report, it's a report that's been audited by a famine review committee, and then it looks at whether the evidence is reasonable to support it. And so it's a very careful and detailed and forensic report. So a denial is one which has no substance to it, and there's no reason to deny what's happening.
And you think you can prove from the evidence that you've got
absolutely.
that a war crime has been committed by Israel?
Well, as to war crimes, it is a war crime under Article 8 of the Rome Statute for a state to intentionally use starvation as part of its warfare. And that includes depriving supplies that are needed for survival. So this isn't just food, of course. When you've got a population, including children, who are dying through malnutrition, they need actually supplements. They need more than food. And Dr Groom will also say about the number of babies that have died because they're lactose intolerant, because they're born of malnourished mothers. So all of that would amount to a war crime. It's also in breach of customary international humanitarian law, and that is also very clear.
I want to go back to Dr Groom in just a second, but just to pick up on that point, you're talking about intentional starvation. I mean, Israel's response is they've issued 2 million tonnes of aid. So how can they be intending to starve a population?
Well, in terms of assessing evidence, the starting point would be a blockade of over 80 days of supplies into Gaza. So that's the starting point. What was the reasoning behind that? How is it argued that that was not intentional? And then fast forwarding, the latest report has set out, and it's repeatedly in other documents, that there are supplies that would actually feed for 3 months the population of Gaza, but they are sitting, awaiting approval to enter. So there's restrictions on supplies. And this is also a breach of international law to impede supplies to the population.
I mean,
and also
Israel would say that Hamas is impeding the supplies by, targeting the aid convoys.
Yes, but where's the evidence of that? There's plenty of evidence of the trucks sitting there with supplies in which are not going through, and that evidence is well documented. And so Israel, as the occupying party in Gaza, is obliged to provide these supplies to enable the survival of the population. And this is not happening at the moment. And so there's overwhelming evidence currently of breaches of international law.
Graeme Groom, when you hear that Israel is about to take over Gaza City, knowing what you know of what's going on there, what impact do you think that will have on people's health and survival?
I think it'll be utterly disastrous, as have all the major evacuations. There is nowhere for them to go. El Mawasi, where we have lived and stayed, we lived there last August. It was jam-packed. We stayed briefly at the other end in May, the other end of our visit in May and in June. There is really no room for another 800,000 people. And in any event, of course, it's not safe because the residents in their tents are still bombed regularly by the IDF. I think that pushing another 800,000 people south will be utterly, utterly disastrous. Could I just say, in the context of starvation, that of course it's happening within walking distance of a mountain of food. And when you raise the point that the idea that Israel says that it's looted by Hamas, the overwhelmingly powerful military force in Gaza is the IDF. If the IDF wished the aid to go to the distribution points that existed by the UN and other organizations, it has the power to do so. It is a complete distraction to say that Hamas or anybody else is stealing it.
Graeme Groom and here in the studio, Kirsty Brimlow, thank you both very much for joining us.